going back the scope if we already knew that she didn't have
No, no, not at all.
I see that Dr. Misra has her hand up.
Thank you, Danny, for that presentation. My question was, how long, what is the time frame between surgery and the second operative?
From her original surgery to the second one, or the time she became originally hypotensive to the second case?
Well, we know she got hypertensive within 4 hours, but what was the, was it on post-op day one?
Yes, it was on post-op day one.
It was probably about 20 hours from one surgery to the next.
Thank you.
I see that Natalie has her hand up.
Yeah, I just was curious, Danny, do you think that the waiting for the general surgery team was indicated in this circumstance, since that added an additional 3 hours?
Sure. So I think that given the concern for bleeding on the small bowel mesentery, understandably wanting general surgery nearby was important if they were going to encounter bleeding. I think this patient would benefit from going back to the OR sooner, likely when the first rapid response happened. And that maybe general surgery would have come faster if they were already in the OR and kind of starting the exploration.
All right.
Danny, can I ask you a question?
Yes, go ahead.
I'm just wondering, was there any talk after this case about changing policies to see at this hospital if it's possible to get general surgery there sooner in an emergent case like this?
That is a great point, Morgan, and I think something that would be a good safety takeaway from this. I don't know if those discussions happen, but I think that's something that definitely should be done.
I will tell you, Morgan, it's a good question, because this surgeon who was on call at more than one hospital at the same time. So that makes, obviously, as you can imagine, for some difficulties. And so, yes, we will be talking about that for sure.
Great. Yeah, I've heard of that before at that hospital, but never in a true emergent case like this. So just curious. Thank you.
Dr. Akins, do you have a comment?
I was going to, Danny, good presentation. I was going to ask, what was the blood loss at the time of surgery?
During the original hysterectomy, the blood loss was 200 cc's. And during the take back, it seems like the total EPL was the 2.5 liters that was removed from the abdomen.
Yeah, and then she dropped from 13. What was the blood drop, the hemoglobin drop?
Yeah, it was, I believe, 13.7 to like 8.9, which is inappropriate for the blood loss that she had during the original surgery.
Yeah, that's the key. I think since you guys probably didn't find active bleeding, the situation could have been that she probably had more blood loss than expected. And obviously, once she equilibrated, the hypotensive episode showed up. So I think it's one of those situations that all of us have to be cognizant of and accurately, as much as we can, estimate the blood loss so that we can transfuse these people either intra-op or immediately post-op to try to avert such situations. Because you went back and you really didn't see anything. And even though, yes, sometimes they wall off, they clot off, but also sometimes it's the estimation of how much blood loss occurred intraoperatively, because it was, underestimated and blood was not given appropriately. So that, and sometimes can lead to other situations with.
It would be, I would say that, yeah, we could be off by 100, or even if you doubled the blood loss, it was a really relatively dry case. So, clearly something happened post-operatively, something opened up. And again, you're correct. I think actions could have occurred faster, no question about that. But the blood loss at the time of the surgery was pretty accurate. I think, even if you double it, it still doesn't explain a 4-gram hemoglobin drop.
All right, well, thank you very much. Thank you, Danny, for 2 excellent presentations. In just a minute, I'm going to ask Dr. Matthews to introduce our grand round speaker. But in the meantime, a word or two about attendance. We'll be taking attendance from the participants list of the WebEx at 8:10. If your name is listed clearly, then you'll get full credit for attendance. A reminder to everyone, in these professional environments, it makes it so much easier for the web host if you type your full name, unless you have a very unique first name. Other than that, new students that we don't know or residents who are part of interviews with a whole bunch of people we don't know, typing your last name can make a huge difference for the organizers. The CME code will be distributed using the email system. And with that, Dr. Matthews, are you ready to introduce our speaker?
Yes, I am. Good morning, everyone. I am super excited about introducing our speaker today. Our speaker today is Dr. Nerys Benfield. She is my mentor. She is my fellowship director. She is my girl that I call when I have any problems or ideas about what my next professional move should be. She's a great clinician, a great educator, an awesome mentor who has taught me what it means to be a great mentor to my residents, an amazing leader who I'm trying to emulate in becoming a great leader like her, a fierce advocate for women's health. She's a professor at the University of California in San Francisco currently, where she serves as the Chief Medical Officer for Women's Health and the Interim Chief Medical Officer for Adult Services, and she is the Vice Chair of Quality and Safety. She was previously the Senior Associate Dean of Diversity and Inclusion and the Director of the Division of Complex Family Planning and the Fellowship Director and the Social Obstetric and Gynecology Program at Albert Einstein. She does everything, and that's why I love her, and that's who I want to be. To say short, Dr. Benfield is amazing, and I can't wait to hear this presentation. And thank you for joining us, Dr. Benfield.
Thank you so much for that lovely introduction. And it's such a pleasure to see you in this early morning here on the West Coast. So thank you all for welcoming me today to talk about family planning and abortion care. Can everyone hear me okay?
Loud and clear.
Excellent. Thank you. And I think you may wonder why I'm calling this presentation Progress in Family Planning when it certainly feels like we may be in some more regressive times, especially after the Dobbs decision. But, in times of challenge, I find that taking the historical lens can really give me some perspective and help me understand how we can continue to make progress and serve our patients and communities. I have no financial conflicts to disclose. I certainly do want to position myself, I am a mixed race immigrant to the United States, a first-generation college student, a mother to a 5-year-old son who was conceived with IUI, a woman who's had an abortion and a pregnancy loss in the second trimester, a complex family planning specialist who provides abortion services in California and in New York. So that's my positionality coming into this conversation. When we talk about the practice of abortion, it's important to understand really what drives that practice, how the forces of both science and society change and evolve and interact to influence the practice of abortion over time. And, we've increasingly come to understand that it is social and structural factors that drive much of an individual person's health. And, those same structures, social and structural forces determine much of the actual practice of medicine as well as it's experienced by the end user. In the case of abortion in particular, and most of reproductive health care, the graphic really, unfortunately, looks a little bit more like this. the influence of society and its power structures and norms at any given time has a profound effect on the practice of abortion. And, you know, these forces drive the way in which abortion is provided, but these forces can't really change whether or not abortion is a part of our society. It is mentioned across diverse cultures and in our most ancient histories. You know, in many ways, it's a practice that's kind of indigenous to us as human beings. First Nations people describe infusions of black elm and stone seed. Chinese medicine practitioners from as early as 2700 BC listing a variety of abortifacients in use in their community at the time. The Ebers Papyrus from 1550 BC gives really rich detail about ancient Egyptian abortion practices. And in his Theaetetus, Plato describes abortion and the practice of abortion by midwives. As ethnologist George Devereaux states, I mean, abortion is an absolutely universal phenomenon, and it is impossible even to construct an imaginary social system in which abortion does not exist. It's also important to note, I think, as Plato did, that this was a practice primarily led by women. And the practice of abortion continued to be within the purview of women throughout the early history of the United States. Advertisements abounded, right? Speaking to families that have increased beyond what the happiness of those who give them birth would dictate. They offered healthy remedies and menstrual regulation, and a wide variety of techniques were in use at this time, with herbs like pennyroyal and ergots, which could be delivered by pill or pessary, intrauterine catheter infusions, and early dilation and curettage as well. You know, women who were seeking these services, they could find them in fancy houses in the Upper East Side with practitioners like Madame Restel, and they found these services in the hands of Black women healers and midwives across the country. You know, abortion was really a part of this rich tradition of lay midwifery and community care. And in this particular time, in the sort of time of industrialization, this was also an opportunity for female entrepreneurism. Unfortunately, here we roll, starting in the 1840s, accelerating really after the Civil War. These social forces began to have a real significant impact on the practice of abortion. And in some ways, it's exemplified by the founding of the American Medical Association, which was formed by physicians with the goal of standardizing and advancing medicine. And it did, in many ways, help us move towards those goals. But it also kind of baked in from its inception inequities that dramatically and negatively changed the landscape of reproductive healthcare and healthcare for women. The AMA explicitly, at the time of its founding, excluded women and Black physicians. And the first female member didn't join until a generation later in 1876. And the first Black physicians couldn't gain membership until after the passage of the Civil Rights Act in 1964. The AMA was really kind of founded on a dismissal and a disrespect for women, for Black and brown communities, and for the knowledge that they contained. And it really did place sort of women-led practices based on indigenous and community knowledge as opposite to the advancement of medicine, and to be targeted and to be eliminated. One of the first committees of the AMA was the Committee on Criminal Abortion. You know, this example, I think, just reinforces the way in which the social forces create and perpetuate the inequities, right? The cog of society here turns with all of the vagaries of power, all of the axes that we use to divide people, all of the isms and schisms, right? Pregnancy and abortion care then at this time, led by the AMA Committee on Criminal Abortion, were really kind of pulled away from women and midwives and out of the community. And a lot of this is driven by narratives of female inferiority and a disrespect for community health traditions and expertise. All of the quotes on this slide are from H.R. Storer, who was the chair of the Committee on Criminal Abortion. And he really, spoke with vehemence about providers of abortion as, quote, vagrant female hyenas who should be treated as pests to be purified by fire. He also spoke of women who seek abortion as suffering from a, quote, derangement of the mind under the stimulus of uterine excitation, right? And all of this was undergirded by a nativist mission and efforts to raise fear about the growth of immigrant communities. And I think, these are striking very similar themes to some of those that we hear resurrected today. Over the course, with this kind of rhetoric and leadership, over the course of the next few decades, abortion came to be outlawed across the country, with many states including both criminal charges as well as fines for the abortion provider and the patient. And the women, often Black women, who provided this care were really targeted and ostracized by this new developing medical establishment. So we created a situation that led to a profound loss of knowledge and a loss of access. And, these social forces didn't change whether abortion continued to be a part of our society. They just changed the who and the how. There continued to be millions of abortions per year, estimated around this time, but they became increasingly unsafe. And this increasingly unsafe practice of abortion claimed the lives of women. It's another universal truth that the legal status of abortion does not determine the incidence, but it does determine the safety. In Romania, abortion was legally available in the 50s and the 60s, and then was severely restricted as part of a nativist policy. And you can see here that as those kind of unsafe and illicit procedures replaced safe legal procedures, abortion-related mortality rose steeply, which is the yellow bar, even while deaths from other pregnancy-related conditions decreased as care improved in general. We saw the same in South Africa when restrictions on abortion were removed when they legalized abortion as part of the new constitution, right? And saw a profound decrease in abortion-related mortality. The same was true in New York in 1970, where 42% of maternal mortality was related to abortion before legalization, and that dropped to less than 2% after legalization with the creation of safe services. So we know what the impact was then, and are concerned about what the impact may be moving forward. After criminalization of abortion and the growth of unsafe practices to fill in this gap, activists and advocates and the civil rights and the women's rights movements, they really sort of raised their voices and moved their feet And they were galvanized by stories of hospital wards that at the time were overflowing with women suffering and dying after unsafe abortion, and fetal and neonatal complications and challenges. Especially, this was also around the time of the thalidomide and all of the fetal anomalies and fear that was associated with that episode. So collectives here like the Citizens Committee for Humane Abortion Laws, which was founded in San Francisco in 1962 by Patricia McGinnis over here on the right. These groups kind of brought all this together, brought some cohesion and some focus to the activism that was going on. At that time, the practice of abortion was also changing. In some ways, women were reclaiming the community provision of abortion, and groups like the Janes in Chicago in the 60s began facilitating underground abortion services through anonymous phone networks, and then soon began providing services themselves. Doctors within the medical community were also pushing against the limits of legally indicated abortion. In 1966, 9 OBGYNs, known as the San Francisco Nine, were threatened with the loss of their license by the medical board because they were providing abortion for women who were infected with rubella in early pregnancy. And remember, this is like pre any kind of ultrasound that could give you the ability to diagnose anomalies. And we know how teratogenic an early rubella infection is. At that time, the leaders of 200 med schools across the country submitted a brief in support of the physicians. Many other groups came together, and over the next 3 years, the state of California, ACOG, and even the AMA would change their position to support the legalization of abortion. And this social movement of about 100 years culminated in the 1973 Supreme Court decision of Roe versus Wade. This was a case set in Texas, the hotspot for abortion regulation still. And this was a young queer woman with a history of addiction who had grown up in the foster care system and had previously placed 2 children for adoption. And she was denied an abortion in Texas, which had restrictions at that time that only allowed for abortion to save the mother's life. And that decision was decided 7-2, noting that the Texas law violated the 14th Amendment. So cogs are moving, society's rolling, science is rolling, and the practice of abortion changes again dramatically. With legalization came, I think, what I'm calling like a revolution in the science of abortion. After 100 years of suppressing investigation and the search for evidence. And not surprisingly, scientists reached back into the deep well of community knowledge on reproductive health and abortion practices. The laminaria that many of us know and use today is obviously originally derived from Laminaria digitata, which has been known from time really immemorial that the stem of the plant could be used to dilate the cervix in traditional midwifery practice. And it wasn't just seaweed. There were a wide range of other types of barks and reeds. And there's even a publication from 1860 noting the efficacy and convenience of laminaria. There were experiments at the time with curved lambs for flex uteri, with antiseptic coated lambs, with hollow lambs to allow for the egress of menstrual blood. But all of this early science was really snuffed out by criminalization in the US. So it wasn't until a century later in the 1970s that research on laminaria in the US resumed. That led to better protocols and significant decreases in infection rates with the addition of sterilization techniques at that time, like irradiation and gas sterilization. And the scientific revolution of abortion kept rolling with the simplification and dissemination of suction aspiration for abortion. The Carmen cannula, as it was originally known, which was created with flexible plastic, was much safer as an option than the original sharp curettage, which led to much lower blood loss, safer procedures. Then we had electric suction, which allowed for expeditious evacuation. And then it was understood that not everywhere has electricity, but this procedure is so much better than the alternative that we have to help ensure that suction aspiration is available to save lives. And USAID funding was used to develop the IPAS manual vacuum aspirator with the express purpose of saving lives. And indeed, it has. The 70s and early 80s also brought us misoprostol, a prostaglandin analog, as you know, that was originally created by Pfizer and approved by the FDA in 1985 for the prevention of NSAID-induced ulcers. When misoprostol was introduced in Brazil, in 1986, its side effect, shall we say, of uterine contractions and the ability to induce abortion became quickly known. And that knowledge then became quickly disseminated. The community of Brazilian women began to share the knowledge and experiment, and within a couple of years, misoprostol became the abortifacient of choice for women in Brazil. Experience and experimentation in the community led to better dosing, better timing, increased effectiveness, decreased side effects. So, women were easily able to fit misoprostol into this kind of long-standing community tradition of medication-induced abortion, menstrual regulation, and we have learned so much from that community generation of knowledge. The advances of the 70s and the 80s, which were heavily rooted in traditional knowledge, really did lead to dramatic progress in the efficacy and safety of abortion. But, society and all its isms also, and 2 years after Roe versus Wade, the Hyde Amendment was passed, which prohibits the use of federal funds for abortion care, except when the woman suffers from a life-endangering physical condition that arises from the pregnancy itself. The exception for rape and incest was not actually added until 1994 under President Clinton. Now, a number of states use their state funds to cover abortion for poorer women, as New Jersey does, but many states do not. And I think it's telling that the first legislation after legalization of abortion was made to create an explicit inequity. The first legislation. Oh, there's the Hyde Amendment. In the 80s and the 90s, that anti-abortion advocacy and activism grew. And abortion really came to be placed in the center of a political agenda once again. Evangelical Christian communities at the time were becoming more politically organized, and leaders such as Jerry Falwell really harnessed the issue of abortion after legalization with Roe, along with sort of a wave of anti-federal government sentiment that rose in some of these communities after decades of heavy enforcement of integration and civil rights and secular changes. Falwell himself campaigned strongly against civil rights, against integrations, against protections for LGBTQ people. And this kind of social change aligned with a political strategy of the Republican Party to draw Southern Christians away from the Democratic Party. So this Venn diagram put abortion in the center of the politics of the white evangelical community at the time, and really kind of forced a uniformity of opinion around abortion in the political setting, which was not reflective of the breadth of opinion on the ground and in the community. And this political action had a significant impact on legislation, on the judiciary. In 1992, the decision in Planned Parenthood versus Casey really opened the door to increasing state-level restrictions on the practice of abortion. And this was a case that evaluated a number of restrictions that had been put forward by the Pennsylvania state legislature, another state that's always a little bit of a hotspot. Regulation and restriction of reproductive health. And this stated new standard, which we now live, which we were living under, of undue burden. So, which has to be a substantial obstacle in the path of a woman seeking an abortion. And they evaluated a number of regulations at that time, and unfortunately, the only one that was struck down as creating an undue burden was required notification of the husband. So it's a standard, but it's a standard that has a wide interpretation. And at the same time, that wheel of science continued to roll with the development of the game-changing medication category of the selective progestin receptor modulators, and specifically here mifepristone, approved in France in 1988. Initially, it was combined with an injectable prostaglandin to induce abortion, and had a 96% success rate at 7 weeks or less. So this was a very exciting addition to the practice of abortion. And over time, research obviously continued, and combinations, routes, doses, implementation, operational processes, all of that evolution of science now leads us to the present day, where we have highly effective, incredibly safe regimens that can be used safely at home, up to 13 weeks, really. So science is continuing to move, and society is continuing to move. And after Casey, really the swell of state-level abortion restrictions becomes, a true tidal wave. Almost half of all the restrictions that have been enacted in the 50 years since legalization happened in the last 10. And more states became increasingly hostile to the practice of legal and safe abortion care. This was also in the context of some of the changing sort of landscape of medicine, which also contributed to decreasing access to legal and safe abortion services. And there's been an increasing number of communities where a Catholic hospital is the only accessible hospital. And we know abortion has been heavily restricted in many of these institutions in modern times. One illustrative story from 2010 was a senior administrator who was a nun, who made a decision to allow an abortion at 11 weeks for a patient dying of heart failure in the ICU. And this administrator was censured and actually excommunicated from the church for that life-saving decision. So abortion was kind of already sort of functionally inaccessible for millions of women. So we have managed to create inequities by economy and by geography. And after Dobbs, the US is now in this sort of space of confusion on the world map. Our patients and providers live in a world of confusion in our daily lives and our practices as well. The social forces that influence the practice of abortion are active all over the world. We've been focusing on the US, but certainly these movements of science and society are happening on a global level too. One of the things that I take some solace in is that globally, these forces are moving more countries towards liberalization as opposed to restriction. I think women in South America have created a real tidal wave of advocacy with their so-called green wave movement. And this was another movement that began in the 70s in Argentina with feminist activists in healthcare collectives, and now has grown to be a movement that's really transforming a continent. It centralized abortion in a greater conversation about the place of women in society, economic justice, and environmental justice. And I think the legalization of abortion across the region has really changed the environment for millions of women. And here in the US, in what also grew to be a global movement, we have certainly been having conversations about women's place in society, economic justice, environmental justice, science, and the importance of shining the light of science on issues that affect health and safety of women and families. And science continues to change the practice of abortion. I would say the science of communication technology in some ways has almost taken us full circle, right? From calling up Jane for abortion services, from some phone number that you got like passed on a note from a friend. And now you look up heyjane.com online to find abortion services. Here is a screenshot from plancpills.org, which shows us the medication abortion meds are available via formal telehealth services and clinics, but also online international pill stores with no prescription needed, and from homegrown community networks like Red State Access. These MIFI Meso one kit packages can be personally purchased for self-directed use at home. I mean, nifty, like, you know, marketing, there's fun naming going on. This is abortion in the community once again. And research and science continue to evolve, right? We're now looking at the use of mifepristone for postcoital contraception. We know that this category of medicine is substantially more effective than levonorgestrel, you know, our current Plan B. Miffy is also probably more effective than even ulipristal. We've also looked at Miffy and Meso at the very earliest delay in menstruation without confirmation of pregnancy, and had successful intervention. We've looked at Miffy and Meso for pregnancy of unknown location and shown expedited time to resolution of symptoms. So in many ways, we have come kind of like forward backward to the point where abortion is kind of back in this women-centered and indigenous understanding of the spectrum of conception and reproduction, and is back in the hands of women at the community level, sharing knowledge, sharing support. The main difference now compared to those earlier practices is that the practice of abortion, specifically early abortion, is vastly more effective, more efficient, and safer than it's ever been. So, where are we going? You know, where are the wheels of science and society turning, and how are those going to impact the practice of abortion in the future? And I think I'm gonna leave you guys with some images here. This is one of my favorite people, astrophysicist Neil deGrasse Tyson, in a screenshot from his series Cosmos. And here he's helping us understand the difference between climate change and the weather, right? The dog is the weather, it moves all around, but climate change is happening. Follow the person, not the dog. And I think the movement of science is a forward movement, despite our swings back and forth. And I think that the movement of society is also, in general, a forward movement, despite our swings back and forth. So how do we keep advancing the science? You know, I recently saw a paper looking at the uterine effect of pennyroyal in rats. I mean, talk about circling all the way back into the well of old community knowledge. You know, how can we continue to have an impact on the science? How can we improve the techniques that we use to manage both miscarriage and abortion? How can we improve our counseling for patients with complex reproductive health issues and decision making? How can we continue to expand the democratization of healthcare through improved technologies? How can we learn through implementation science the best ways to provide care? So can you contribute to the science of communication, to the science of reproductive health care in general? Can you also contribute by helping others understand the science of abortion and the impact of legislative interference? I also want to leave you with an image of the inimitable Gloria Richardson, who was a civil rights activist who unfortunately passed away last year at the age of 99. Do it, Gloria. But, you know, I think Gloria just keeps it moving, right? Gloria is not wasting any time. Gloria is not intimidated. Gloria is not operating from a place of fear. Gloria is advancing forward. And I think that is the most important thing. So connecting with your inner Gloria, getting ready to be one of the people who drives progress, right? This is all of this history is just people. It's people communicating, it's people protesting, it's people taking action. And that is how we can continue to contribute today. There are opportunities to take action within research. We are keeping an eye on the impact of the Dobbs legislation on the provision of abortion care quantitatively through the We Count study. So if your service is a participant in that, That's wonderful. That gives us a sense of what's going on. We are also collecting information from providers with narratives of ways that changes in legislation have negatively impacted their practice and their patients' experiences. And patients are also coming forward both in formal legislation, like the case in Texas, where a series of patients have brought a lawsuit challenging those restrictions. We also have opportunities for institutional advocacy. Those of us who are in protective states, have opportunities to ensure that their institutions are strengthening their protections for providers and for patients, are enhancing their capacity to offer services as needed, are creating connections with other communities, other medical centers to improve the referral processes and streamline transfers of patients. For those in restrictive states, really it's about not doing the work of the state within the institution, not choosing to interpret laws that are created with legal language, not medical language, and choosing to interpret those in ways that are expansive is incredibly important in many of these restrictive states. There are also a lot of great organizations that are out there doing advocacy, connecting people who want to advocate with opportunities. The Society of Family Planning and Physicians for Reproductive Health are both important groups to be connected with or aware of. And of course, there's also ways to use our financial resources to support abortion provision too, with many communities and areas developing abortion funds or enhancing their abortion funds to support patients who need to travel for services, or the large communities of women who have absolutely no coverage for abortion services. So I appreciate everyone's time, and thank you all so much. I was given a hard 45 minutes to to fit this under, to ensure that we had any time for questions or comments or thoughts. I am gonna stop the share so we can see each other if anyone wants to pop on their video. I know it's early.
Dr. Benfield, thank you so much for this excellent review and discussion. Thank you. I see that Dr. Bayat has her hand up.
Good morning, Dr. Benfield. This is Lily. I'm Dr. Matthew's CFP partner in crime. As always, every time I hear you speak, I get goosebumps, and I'm so appreciative of being able to hear you talk. If you are in the market for any new mentees, please let me or Dr. Matthews know. She's doing wonderful things, so you've done such a wonderful job. I first of all want to thank you for disclosing your own abortion. I feel like in this post-Roe and Dobbs era, that's so important. I am going to follow your lead and say that I am incredibly thankful for the physician who provided my own abortion that allowed me to reach my professional and personal dreams. So thank you so much for that. The question I have for you is, about how you think that we as physicians can work to reduce the criminalization of pregnancy outcomes for girls and women in a post-Roe world where I worry that criminalization is going to increase. So do you have any thoughts or comments about what we can do as OBGYNs to protect our patients? And thank you again.
Yeah, thank you, Lily, for that. And it's a pleasure to see you this morning as well. I think there's a variety of things depending on the level at which you are operating. So, one thing, of course, is to protect your patient and the patients in your community. And some of that is institutional privacy protections. So, for any patients who are traveling out of state, ensuring that you have traveling from a restrictive state, say, ensuring that you have ways of protecting their medical record within the EMR, making it a sensitive encounter will automatically restrict access to that from Care Everywhere for those who are on Apex, on other on Epic, on other EMRs. There are routes to that. There's also, it's important to provide patients, I think, with information about data integrity and the risks that to privacy at various phases of the medical encounter. So that's one thing, just kind of protecting the patient. And from a larger level around criminalization, it is about the stories. It is the narratives that help people understand the provision of abortion, the whys for many of these cases, the experience of our patients, so that we counter that narrative of the sort of abortion mill, the unsafe practice, the taking advantage of patients. Like, that is a strong narrative about who abortion providers are, and then consequently who abortion patients are. Sharing of those stories can be particularly helpful. And I think both internally for institutional advocacy, as well as externally for state advocacy. There are many providers who are testifying at state legislatures where things are being assessed. There are many providers who are engaging in their professional societies and working in advocacy groups. It was reproductive health advocacy groups who came together on the ground in Ohio to get the ballot initiative to support abortion in their state constitution off and running. So connecting with your local reproductive health groups as well, checking out social media to see who's active in your community, and connecting with those groups can also be really helpful too. So a lot, I think, of opportunities for those who have bandwidth. For those who don't, just continuing to do your excellent work, continuing to raise, if opportunity presents itself, to raise the importance of voting and advocating with your patients as well.
I have a question since no one else has a question. How do you think, lovely speech, great presentation as always. I was able to learn some more stuff, which is always refreshing to recharge my energy and enthusiasm as I continue to grind and do this work. How do you think in this history, now that we've formalized our fellowship in complex family planning, how do you think that plays a role in solidarity and reinforcing and strengthening the abortion work? And what are some things that we in our protective states can do to be more impactful for people that are in more restrictive states? Sorry, I have like this sinusitis going on right now.
So I think the complex family planning community, the sort of development of the structure of that community within academic OBGYN has been wonderful in as much as it has created these collaborations and this sense of a national community. I think one of the ways that this has played out in many areas is around education on abortion right now, which obviously has been severely restricted now in states that do not allow for abortion care in the legal setting. It's been the sort of fellowship community that has come together to figure out ways to support trainees from restrictive states traveling, getting exposure to abortion services in other areas. So that's one, I think, clear example of the benefits of the fellowship creating this kind of national community within academics. One of the ways in which people in protective states can also have an impact through education. I know at where we both used to be at Einstein, through the fellowship community connection, they have been able to train residents from Tennessee. At UCSF, where I am now, through the fellowship connection and the Ryan residency training program connection, they are training residents from Texas. And this is happening all over the country as well. So I think it's been a very important group, and that continuing to ensure that we have educational opportunities for the next generation of OBGYN providers is really critical. The ACGME has not changed its requirement for training in abortion services after Dobbs, but has really left programs without any support to
Dr. Benfield, we've lost the signal. Can you hear me? Dr. Benfield, if you can hear me, turn your camera off so that your bandwidth can just be used for your audio. I'll just give her a call. Good morning, it's Gary Ebert. We seem to have lost you. Uh-huh.
I'm not.
Oh, you're back.
Hey!
Dr. Benfield, turn your picture off and so that all your bandwidth goes into your audio.
Okay, thank you for that. Yeah, I was
Benfield.
and then said, "What happened?" Sorry, apologies.
Well, we only have a few minutes left, and Dana Shaw, our finest resident, has a question for you.
Hi, Dr. Benfield. Thank you so much for your talk. I'm asking you a question that was actually posed to me and a co-resident of mine when we were giving a talk on Maternal Health Awareness Day regarding abortion education. And the question kind of was, in a post-Dobbs era, how do we feel about in the process of picking medical students to be residents as programs? Should programs be prioritizing residents who programs that have, let's say, Ryan programs or in less restrictive states, should we be prioritizing medical students who, are planning to be abortion providers in our programs, or should that factor into our decisions, because spots in less restrictive states, potentially, I don't know, a spot taken by someone who doesn't plan to have this training, and then someone who would really like to be an abortion provider but ends up matching elsewhere and doesn't get the training at all. That's one less person who could have these skills. Just curious if you had a thought on that at all.
Yeah, I think that selection for residency is obviously a process that we want to approach in a holistic manner. And we want to both select residents who we think are going to be really able to succeed in our program and contribute both to the program and to the OBGYN community. So I think that it is important to ensure that as many trainees as possible get exposure to abortion, and to recognize that even in a service that provides routine induced abortion, a lot of the care is for patients with pregnancy loss or fetal anomalies, maternal conditions, and that is still something that trainees get experience with in restrictive states. So I would say that I wouldn't necessarily use that one issue as a kind of a barrier to entry, but I would want to make it clear as a training program that has a strong component of training in abortion, that is a source of pride for the program. That is an area that the program feels is strong for mentorship, for growth, for sort of career development, and that will naturally draw people who are interested in that topic. So a vague answer, I'm afraid, but I think the most important thing is ensuring that all of our trainees understand the importance of abortion, how it fits into the scope of reproductive health care, and the safe techniques to provide care.
I see that Dr. Gerda has her hand up.
Thank you. Thanks, Dr. Benfield. This is Jane Gerda. Thank you for treating me. It's so good to see you. I wanted to ask from the gynonc perspective. Here we're always available as backup or intra for abnormal placentation terminations. I was wondering to get your opinion on how do you practice and how do you view these other service involvement in more complex cases like these?
Yes, for sure. I mean, I think, I always say our gynoncs are our line of last defense, right? You guys are always such wonderful partners with complex surgery, however whatever the initial indication was. So as far as pregnancies with abnormal placentation, this is a very exciting area, I think, of investigation. There are growing case series of primary aspiration for early scar ectopics, for example. And on the other end of the spectrum, right, there's lots of investigation around the management of abnormal placentation after delivery and potentially some mixed conservative management options. So there is a lot going on with the science right now, which is very exciting. But in the end, yes, when we are in a space where we are engaging in a complex surgical procedure, we need our gynec colleagues involved for sure. So I love that collaboration, and I think that this, if you guys are seeing a volume of these, I think we have like some decent growing data in the first trimester. Obviously, we have a lot of term. But that second trimester, we actually don't have a lot of data. So if you guys are seeing even a handful of these, that could be a contribution to the literature of how we manage in the second try.
All right, well, Dr. Benfield, we're just about out of time. So I just wanted to thank you again.
Thank you so much. It was a real pleasure to speak to you all this morning.
Yes, thank you. And with that, we're going to have to end. I hope everyone has a safe and successful day.